Hi everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. Today I'm moving to the bottom of the meteor and continuing on with the coral. How is your coloring coming along? I'm keeping the palette limited to just the colors listed on the screen. Does that make it easier? Let me know below. I just started up on MeWe and would love to build a coloring community there with everyone. If there is enough interest, I'd love to start a group for everyone to share their art, talk art, and discuss supplies. It is free to join MeWe and participate. Just skip the free trial. My pencils are sharpened and I'm ready to get going. Come along and join me and let's color this in together. I'm starting with the dark cadmium orange, layering in a light layer over the sprinkled coral under the flames. I have a little trouble telling where the coral stops and where the other corals begin, so I just make a best guess. I put down at least 2 coats to make sure I have a nice coverage of the paper and the coral. The orange is my main color for this one. With the deep scarlet red, I want to come in and hit up any areas that would be in shadow. So this includes any places where the artist drew hash lines as well as any other overlaps, even the flames. I come in with the orange over the red to keep the red from standing out too much and to make sure I have full coverage. Once I have that in place, I can come in with the sepia and use that to darken up the darkest part of the shadows. This will just be in the red areas, but wouldn't cover all of the red, just part of it. I'm coming back in with the orange to blend everything together. I don't really think of it as blending, but rather just putting another layer on top and tinting everything with the orange. I'm using the magenta to darken up the shadows again. I'm pretty much in refining mode at this point. I will work my way through the colors to make sure the shadows are dark enough so that the highlights stand out enough. For a final touch, I used a little ivory on the highlights. I'm not sure it actually stands out, but it does help blend and lighten the area a little. With the cobalt green, I am coming in for a base layer on more of the coral, the finger coral. There are several clumps on this part of the meteor that I will be hitting. After I get the cobalt green down, I come in with the grass green for the tips of the coral. I noticed there was more finger coral below the flame, so I gave that a base layer of the cobalt green, as well as followed up with the grass green on the tips. I'm using the cobalt blue greenish to begin adding in some of the shadows. The blue greenish will go at the base of the fingers where I think the shadows would be. It will help the lighter green fingers stand out more too. I touch up the shadows with more of the cobalt green before coming in with the dark sepia, which really makes a big difference in the shadows. I come in with the cadmium yellow lemon on the tips to lighten up the grass green even more and really help those tips pop. I go back in with all the colors again, adding in at least one more layer, if not more, to make sure the tooth of the paper has been well covered and the colors are blending together. I spot some long grass strands and move onto those, giving them several light layers of the light purple pink. I use the magenta at the base for a little bit of shadow. There isn't much I can do for the base of these, as they are hiding in the crevice of the book. I'm afraid to really press down and break the spine because it looks like the book is glue bound, so I'd rather not take the chance. Moving along, I decided to work up this large flat coral next. It reminds me of the stacked coral, so I'm going to work it up in blue as well. I still haven't figured out a good way to make neon blue, but I began with a light layer of the cobalt blue-greenish over the whole piece. I then came in with the phthalo blue on the highlights and the dark sepia in the shadowed areas. I used more of the blue-greenish in the shadowed areas to make them darker. The format of this coral is a little different from the other, so I am trying to figure out the best way to lay the colors down. I used some of the ivory on the highlights. I'm layering in more of each color, trying to refine the color and blend them into a nice piece of coral. I'm finished with this coral for now, but I might come back in later and touch it up with a little more color. I'll probably do that with some of the other corals as I work more of the pieces. The more color surrounding a piece of coral, the more it might need touching up in the shadows or around the edges from missing spots. This strange basket-shaped thing is next. I began with grass green in the bottom of the basket part. I was at a bit of a loss on how to color this in. I'm not sure I care for a limited palette, but having every color under the rainbow still might not have helped me figure out what color this should be. I used the light cadmium yellow on the fluffy top. I put a light layer of the grass green over top of the yellow, then added in more yellow lemon on top. I didn't want straight yellow for this part. I used the yellow lemon on the bottom part as well. I layered in more green and came in with the sepia to try to define some shadows. I can now refine the colors using more layers and touching up, but I think this is what it is going to be. I might have to come back and touch it up later as well. It appears to be very light and might get lost in with the other colors. I wanted to work on these balls next, as I did some on the first part of the meteor. I will work them up the same way, beginning with a light layer of the dark cadmium orange over all of the balls. After that, I will hit them up with a light layer of the cadmium yellow over the entire ball. The shadows will be started with the scarlet red, focusing on the crevices between each ball at the base and at the base of the balls. I want to leave the top part free of the red, as that will become the highlight for the balls. I doubt coral shines, but this is what I am doing. I touch up the highlights again with the yellow to brighten up the orange again. My colors are mostly in place at this point, and now I am in the refining stage. I come in with the orange over the red to keep the red from standing out too much and to make sure I have full coverage. For me, everything is a layering process using light layers. This is why colored pencil work can be so slow. Changing up the color, I'm going to go back to the blues and work up more of the finger coral. There are at least 4 clumps here in this section that I will work on. I'm laying down a base layer of the cobalt green first over all the clumps. With the grass green, I want to come in and hit up all the tips of the fingers. I'm not perfect, and it doesn't matter because the shadows will cover any spots I might have gone over on or further down than necessary. For the shadows, I start blocking them in with the phthalo blue at the base of the fingers and in overlapping areas. I touch up the shadows with more of the cobalt green, blending it just a little into the grass green. Not too far, as I want to preserve the brightness of the green on the tips. I add in another layer of the grass green on the tips to fill in the tooth of the paper. And now I bring in the sepia to really define the shadows. I can also come in around some of the fingers to better define them. This is mostly on the second clump, where here there are front fingers that are overlapping back fingers. I'm going to call this next coral a brain coral. It reminds me of one, and I decided it should be orange. I used the dark cadmium orange to put down 2 layers over the whole coral. I brought in the light cadmium yellow for the top part of the coral where it would be the lightest. I blocked in the shadows with the deep scarlet red as well as the dimples on the surface of the coral. I want the dimples to be pretty dark. I used more layers to blend and fill in the tooth of the paper. This is part of my refining here by adding in more layers with each of the colors and touching up each area more. I finalized the shadows with the dark sepia, keeping it mostly to the bottom most part of the coral where it would be darkest. Since I have the red, orange, and yellow in my hand, I decided to also work up this bubble coral next. Same colors, but not made to look the same. I'm coming in with the light cadmium yellow first over all the bubble corals. I doubt they are all the same, but they look similar enough that I'm just going to color them all the same. With the dark cadmium orange, I hit up the center of the first group. This is where the shade lines are. The second group in the cave are similar to the ball coral from earlier, so I color the base of them, leaving a yellow crescent around the top edge. The rest receive more in the center and some around the edges leading into the center. With the scarlet, I deepen up the center of the orange I just colored. Most of these seem to have an opening at the top where I am putting the darkest shadow. The round one with the lines going up to the center, I am coloring that more in a striped pattern. The balls in the cave will have the shadow at the bottom. Now that I have my colors in place, I will go through and add more layers to better fill in the tooth of the paper and blend everything together more. I want to do something different with the background base of the meteor. I wanted something brownish and dark to help the bright corals stand out more, something rock-like in color. I came in with the warm gray 5 as a base layer. This is for the spots between the corals where it doesn't seem to be part of any coral. I then come in with the dark sepia to make some shadows around the base of the corals. While I am working up what I feel to be background, I did notice I missed a little of the finger coral, so I hit that up with the cobalt green and grass green. Then I touched up the shadows again with the cobalt blue greenish. Tomorrow I will continue working up the background parts of the meteor as well as more of the coral. I really hope you've been following along. Please let me know. I'd love to know how your coral looks. I have my social media links below. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, MeWe, and Patreon. Patreon has a short write-up as well as all the palettes I am using and a list of the timestamps. You don't have to support me to see it. If you have any questions or page requests, please leave them below or reach out to me on social media. I put in a list of chapter breaks in the show notes as well as a list of equipment I like to use. If you use any of my affiliate links, it really helps me out without costing you a thing. I want to thank you all so much for coming along and joining in with me on this coloring journey. I appreciate all my subscribers and look forward to more of you joining in and coloring along with me. Please like, share, and subscribe to help that happen. Until next time, happy coloring.